We're live. Let's do it. Hey, Will. How you doing?
We are. I'm good. How are you?
I'm really good. It's a beautiful sunny day. I hope wherever our audience is, it's equally lovely. Of course, it could be nighttime, it could be daytime, it could be any time of day, it could be, who knows, wherever you are in the world. That's always quite mad, isn't it? You think that you're sort of you do the YouTube show and anywhere somewhere on the other side of the planet can be tuning in and listening. So it's quite cool, isn't it?
It is very cool. It's very cool.
So,
right.
Thank you for joining us. Today we've got something a little bit different for you guys. So usually, if you're not familiar with the show, we usually catch up with the latest news every day, Monday to Friday, and we talk about whatever grabs our attention, the latest news, and we have a time limit of 5 minutes per conversation that we time, and we try and keep a tight sort of grip on, moving the conversation forward. And really, we're reacting to those stories almost live and giving you our sort of take on it. So what's different about today's show? We're actually going to talk about a topic which is relevant to what in our field, and we're just going to talk about that for the whole session. So we're not going to sort of limit ourselves. And really, the topic is all about AI chatbot therapists. Now, for those of you who don't know, I'm sure many of you won't know, we're Ava Technologies. We're a software AI development house. So we are building our own product, which is Ava Mind, which is an AI therapeutic assistant. You can find it on the App Store, Google Play, and all those and those places. Yeah, and you can obviously download it and have a play and give some feedback and let us know what you think. So when we saw this article, Will, didn't we? We thought, hang on a second, this is very relevant to our field and what we're working in.
Well, exactly.
Talking about.
Well, exactly. I mean, it came up as an article. Obviously, we talk about several bits of news every single day, and this article came up in the pile of news that we wanted to talk about. So when we saw it, I thought, wow, actually, maybe we should take a little bit more time to go through this in a lot more detail than we normally would, and talk about some of the points, because it's very, very close to home and pertinent to what we're doing. I think it'll be interesting to talk about our perspective on it, as well as see the perspective of the author of this article, and just generally go through some of the things that we are doing to mitigate some of the problems that we're aware of, all of those things.
Absolutely. And I think, again, the reason why this is probably worth talking about and spending more time on compared to, the format of our usual shows is because it is very different to the normal conversation that everyone's having in AI. And that's always about automation, speed, efficiency. It's all of those types of conversations. But I think, as you'll agree, Will, we need to have these other conversations, which is about, well, what does it mean for society? What are the implications? What does, I mean, we're not really covering it here, but what does work mean when there are no jobs or a lot of jobs are lost? So, what does our purpose, what is humans' purpose if our purpose is no longer work? What do we do? Do we work for a passion rather than for a need? So there's all these sort of societal questions that we're going to face as a society. And I think it's important that as builders in this space that we also have these conversations and think about these things. So that's really where we're coming from.
And this is one of those societal questions. This is one of the societal questions. Obviously, you mentioned one, which is what we do for work as a potential problem with AI. And this one is one that's, as you said, probably not talked about as much, but it's people's reliance on these chatbots and these large language models as friends or therapists, and even attempting to be romantic partners with AIs. And I think that's a real problem, and one that we directly are, we have to be very wary of when we're building. So I think what we're going to do is we'll go through this article is very conveniently broken down headline to headline. So we'll go through that headline, what the opinion of the author is, and then we'll open up the floor and have a discussion about that. So should we jump in?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. I'll scroll down onto the first bit, which is conveniently titled, But Dr. Chatbot says I'm perfect. Sorry, the title threw me slightly there. Really, the essence of this core paragraph is that chatbots are sort of, especially ChatGPT, if you've spoken to it for a while, is it very, very often affirms you and affirms your standpoint instead of necessarily taking an opposite stance. It's very reassuring. And again, often you can go, I have this problem. What do you think? Do you think I'm in the wrong? And it will affirm you and say, I don't think you're in the wrong. I understand where you're coming from. But then if you ask it to still man the other side, it will very happily do the same. And I think that this is funny if you know that it does this. But to people that are generally looking for help and advice there and don't know this, then that can be very dangerous. So this is what this whole paragraph is going on about, is it's talking about how that's a massive problem, because unlike a human therapist or a human friend, it won't necessarily give you tough love if you need it. What do you think about that, Ben?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I read something about autism, and you can see how people could just literally go down that spiral of digging deeper and digging deeper and digging deeper and digging deeper to potentially a dangerous point, because that's what it tends to do. You tend to be able to sort of dive into a subject and, incredibly just, get that depth. But for people who maybe are sort of tuned differently, or maybe different is the wrong word, but again, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, so I might not be using the correct terms, but this other article I read was just sort of talking about those dangers, and I think it was an article from the New York Times, and it was just interesting because obviously a lot of ChatGPT, the big one, of course, it has that tendency to just enable a user to just dive incredibly deep into a conversation. And you're right, unless you have that awareness to be able to self-regulate your thinking, to say, oh, actually, am I right? Because the AI has a tendency just to go, yeah, you're right, and let's dive into this. And yes, you're right. So it's really interesting, and I think there's that danger that we could be building a society of narcissists where we're constantly being validated and thinking that we're always right, and rather than having a conversation with our peers who actually may be brutally honest and say, maybe you're wrong here. So it's really interesting, and it's something that is going to have to be really considered in terms of the way an AI interacts with a human, because it's not, as good as it is, it's not how we interact as people to each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think this paragraph in the article here, which I am highlighting on the screen, is a really interesting one about why somebody would find something like ChatGPT or another chatbot really like addictive almost. That's what it literally uses, the word addictive, and it's that instant reassurance it will give you. It will reply immediately. It will be instantaneous, and it will make you feel better straight away. And another really interesting point, which I guess people don't necessarily think about, again, is that it never gets sick of talking to you. It will always reply, unlike a human friend or a human partner, not necessarily a therapist, but those are close to you. They might get annoyed at certain topics. This one specifically references OCD, and how I believe her husband, if I'm reading correctly, would get annoyed at bringing up OCD, and ChatGPT would happily affirm it, reassure you. And to some doctors, that is a problem, and you shouldn't be reassuring and saying that compulsions with OCD are useful. As an example, I'm not a doctor either, but again, it's that interesting stance of instantaneous, doesn't get sick. You can see why that's addicting, and whether that's a good thing remains to be discussed.
And again, it's quite, we've got to think about what does, how do children who are brought up in this world, how are they going to be shaped? How are those social skills going to be developed? How are their social interactions going to evolve compared to, if they're very used to being told that they're constantly right, and they have or they have a problem with a conversation they have with their parents, and they resort only to an AI to give them a perspective, which is likely to self-validate their own opinions. So
I think that's exactly what you're saying in this last paragraph. It's very interesting. It's like, what is the social cost of scaling technology to millions of people who trust it for the most important life questions, if that technology lacks the critical insight to help users and that don't know how to help themselves? Because again, if you don't know what to ask it, you won't get the answer that you need necessarily. So if you are in denial about the problem and you don't have the self-reflection at that point to ask the right question, then it will take you completely down the wrong track. Now, Sorry, you go.
No, I was going to say, literally, that's so very true, because if you don't know the questions to ask, it's very hard to
get the answer.
To know where to go, if that makes sense.
Yes, exactly. So I think it's really important.
Down the wrong path.
Yes, I think it's really important to also tackle, as we go through these points. I mean, this is a fairly negative stance on using AI as a friend or a therapeutic assistant. However, we're obviously directly building that. So I think it's really important that we offer our perspective on how we solve these problems, because I think that they are solvable, and I think that there is things that we can do to make AI helpful, to people, in that domain. Maybe not in the way that this author envisions it, but I certainly think that we can do it.
And do you want to share what your sort of initial thoughts are on that?
Yeah, I mean, we do several things. I think it's important to note that from day one of Ava, we have never wanted to try and replace humans in this process. We've only ever wanted to provide an aid to an existing well-being process, and I think that this, at least in the state that AI is now, is the best thing. It doesn't try to, at the earliest convenience, if the AI detects that you need further assistance, it will end the conversation and say you need to go and speak to somebody about this. It's much more about being an assistant, a therapeutic assistant, more than a therapist. We've directly built a chatbot that does talk in a short therapeutic way. It uses traditional CBT techniques. It doesn't offer opinions on it, and it much more guides the user with questions. The user answers, and then it asks more questions, a bit like a very traditional therapy. So it's much shorter in conversation, but it helps users uncover their own feelings instead of affirming and saying, yes, you're absolutely right. Why do you feel like that? Which is obviously much more along the lines of what I think is necessary.
Absolutely. No, that's a really good point, Will. Thank you.
That's right. There's lots more. But we'll get into them as we go. But I think the headline to that is you shouldn't be building products that are pretending or aiming to be friends or actual therapists to the users. You should always keep that foot into reality and use it as an aid, not a solution. So,
interesting.
Should we move on to the next one?
Let's do it.
This is sort of very similar, and it is again going down that route of affirming users, but this is going like one step further, and talking about how it can actually start to foster like delusions and narcissism out the other side. It cites several examples. For example, an autistic individual who was hospitalized after ChatGPT validated a delusional belief in bending time. And the concern is pretty clear. AI is designed to affirm and exaggerate delusion and social withdrawal, is a real problem. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We sort of did touch on it, didn't we?
Yeah.
I think it's so important that we think carefully about how users interact with AI. Because it's very easy to build, a generalist AI product, and it fits.
Yes.
90%, 80%, 70% of use cases, but for those who have challenges and think differently and wired differently, then
Yes.
if it's not done with thought and with care, I mean, it could have serious repercussions, and it's going to happen, unfortunately. There's not, there are always going to be these extreme situations, unfortunately, that are going to happen. But I think as builders in the space, we've just got to I think focus more on capturing attention, and we've got to focus on building it right, if that makes sense. Because whenever I think new technology, like for example, when social was a thing, when it was first born, it was all about just grabbing attention, and we'll figure out the consequences later. We're not going to worry too much. We're just going growth. And I think AI is very similar in terms of like waste. The social media landscape was, had its boom. It's almost like AI is now the boom, and probably amplified to 10 times. Because social media, when it first came out, that was a whole new thing. And all the tech companies were just going for growth, not really worrying about the consequences. But I think I'm sure there's also. Say again.
I don't think we can necessarily do that with AI.
No, I agree. Well, I'm sure there's others who maybe take a different slant and a bit more cutthroat potentially.
No, naturally.
It's we're in that well-being and mental health space, and we want to be careful with what we're building and be mindful. And it's not to say we're going to get it perfect, but we are committed to that because we want to help. Ultimately.
I think this point further to the one above. This is a direct lead on. I think this is going after a nuance to that point, which is that AI doesn't know who they're speaking to. Again, ChatGPT is not a sentient thing. It's a very very fancy next word guesser, in essence, and it has no concept of you or what you're speaking to. Again, in this example here within the article, it doesn't know you have autism. It doesn't know that. It doesn't recognize the fact that you might be going into a bit of a spiral. It doesn't understand that that's something that you do, and that's where the danger comes in, because it will just dig deeper and lead you down a path, and it has absolutely no concept of you on the other side. And that's what we have to put protections in place for. And again, ChatGPT doesn't have any of that massively. No. However, if we're going to build a therapeutic assistant, which we are, we have to cater for this. So we do two things. Again, we always have sentiment analysis, which is, again, I'm not saying it's perfect and it's something we always work on. But again, if the AI detects, which you can put post training in for, you can do system prompting, you can do a lot to have that sentiment analysis in there, but it will detect if something is off or going downhill, and it will immediately end the conversation. If so, not to the point where it just clicks end, but it says, this conversation probably isn't going to be very productive. What you should do is go and talk to, a friend or a therapist. In our case, a therapist. And that.
Sorry. Well, I was just about to dive in there. It made me think from a product perspective of how we can improve upon Ava. What's your? I mean, we're doing this live, guys. So this is my reaction straight away. So this is something we're sharing with you as we're thinking about it. So from a product perspective, we could think about enabling, you said that there was that gap between the AI not understanding the individual, but giving out a set of sort of a structured output. That's how it's been designed. But if we could enable users to share maybe their particular way that they are, whether it's autism, whether it's whatever it is, or whether the therapist can upload that information, whether that could be a real sort of maybe part of a guardrail, part of the way that the AI will interact with that individual is different to how it may interact with another individual, because it then understands that person in much more depth and is able to assist in a more personalized way. I mean, we've talked about personalized AIs in terms of having them bespoke to a maybe one day you need a therapeutic assistant, and the next day you need a business coach, the next day you need a sports coach.
Yeah,
maybe the AI will talk to you in a different way and give you different outputs. But being able to understand you in terms of like potentially high risk types of mental health, it could be interesting to think about that as a product feature, maybe.
Yeah, no, agreed. So again, this is where I was going to lead as the next thing is building and doing research into things like memory and long-term context, so that an AI can hold on to more information about you. Again, when you boot up if you don't have an account with ChatGPT and you just load up chatgpt.com and you type out a message, again, it has absolutely no context if you haven't spoken to it before. It doesn't know. It can't. And again, I'm not sure if it's a pro feature or if it's a feature of the free accounts. But again, I believe if you have a free account, it still doesn't have memory. So again, a lot of people don't pay for this and they just use it.
YouTube upload, because it was just okay, we are back. Sorry about that. We had a
little bit of a technical hiccup there. But we're jumping back in.
It's like going to the cinema, having a little interlude and get your little ice cream and popcorn, and then have a break and go back to it.
So I don't know at what point this will be edited together, but we might leave the beginning of the technical hiccup. But essentially, apparently my audio got completely lost to you, so I was just sat here in silence. But anyway, we're back, and we'll pick up from the next point if you're happy to. Then
let's do it. Let's dive in.
Which, to summarize a rather large section of this article, is about basically personality at scale and how we can control that, essentially. So again, this is all to do with AI alignment and how does an AI form its opinions, quote unquote. The article quotes quite a recent slip up by Grok on X, which is Elon Musk's AI model through XAI. And it accidentally went on a couple of anti-Semitic rants, which is obviously not ideal on a platform. So yeah, and that obviously geared an awful lot of negative press about it, and and it is a problem. And this introduces a larger problem to do with therapy and relationships. Is again, how do you scale a model to have the right alignment and the right personality, to deal with the person on the other end? Again, someone talking in the UK where we are has very different cultural identities and cultural ideologies to someone living, even in Australia or the Middle East. We're all coming from different perspectives. And how do you make sure that the AI is going to say the right thing whilst also not doing what we said the points above, without slipping into this delusional, fostering narcissism and affirming people incorrectly? It's talking about how do you align that? It's very, very tricky.
And also, what, something that just jumped in my mind. I mean, obviously, anti-Semitism, racism, all these things are horrendous. But who becomes the arbiter of what's right and what's wrong? Because Absolutely. That is a whole nother minefield. Absolutely. I mean, because although we may create a system that we think is correct, like now, does that then put a power in the hands of someone to suddenly go, oh, this is now what's right and what's wrong? And yes. That it's the danger of you create a system where it might be right in the moment, but who's not to say that in 10, 50, 100 years that a bad actor can come in and somehow be the arbiter of whatever they think, which may actually not be a good thing. So that gets you thinking in terms of, those challenging, I guess, both social and, how do you mitigate that? It's very, very interesting. But I mean, that problem, it is not just a tech problem or an AI problem. That's a problem in society, full stop, in terms of the way we're structured and the way laws are made and all the rest of it. So it's not. I guess what I'm saying, it's not a problem solely in our field.
Yeah, no, exactly. I completely agree. I think that I'm not going to pretend that I think this is one of the ones that is much harder to solve. Because you when you train an AI and you post-train an AI, you cannot help, as this article says, but bake ideologies and bake personalities into this thing. It's really very tricky to overcome. And the alignment problem is literally got a name in computer science. The alignment problem is an ongoing. The best minds in the world are working on how do you, again, not just within therapy, within the entire sort of realm of AI, is how do you make sure that an AI is aligned with our thinking, our desire for progress all over the world. And it's very, very tricky. Very, very tricky.
And you hit the nail on the head earlier as well. You said our cultural perspectives are very different from other people's, and we shouldn't be putting our cultural sort of values on other cultures. And trying to sort of dominate our thinking in terms of how other people should live. That's a really interesting challenge and problem. It's ultimately has existed since the day of dawn. Whenever a country, from empire to before, they impose their cultures and their ways of life on wherever they've come to, wherever they've been. So. But it is something that we should be mindful of in terms of the way we deal with.
Again, within what we are doing, what we have already put in place is, and I'm not pretending that we've solved the alignment problem, but one of the things that we've done is give it specific system prompting, specific post-training to the base large language model to direct the conversation into a very recognized form of therapeutic conversation with CBT. And it remains incredibly neutral in situations and encourages the user to do the talking instead of offering its own opinions or its own thoughts, or potentially even both sides. It literally mostly encourages you to carry on talking instead of sort of affirming delusions or affirming beliefs, which I think is at the moment the best possible stance we can be in. But I'm not going to pretend it won't need further work. And that's something we're actively working on.
These are big challenges and big sort of questions that not only do we have to face, but society as a whole. It's really slightly mind blowing, I think, and it's something that, well, I don't think it's had to be faced before. And the problem is there isn't huge conversations happening about it, particularly in the political sphere. But this is where I guess the social sciences have a role to play. So it's really interesting, and never before have we seen this. Really, this need to have these types of conversations. We've had to just deal with it. I guess the Industrial Revolution, they never had these types of conversations, and these types of conversations weren't really capable to be had at this at this scale. So that's one advantage we do have, is an ability to communicate and talk about these things at scale. So interesting.
Yes. I think this last set of paragraphs, which is the end of the article, sums up kind of a lot of our thinking, and a lot of it references Sam Altman, who's appeared in the conversation on this podcast a few times now. And it basically states that AI companies are starting to understand about this social dilemma now. And he made a statement last week where he acknowledged that people are becoming surprisingly attached to it. Again, when we covered GPT-5 in the previous couple of episodes, again, people aren't complaining about the knowledge of it. They're complaining about the personality differences, which is a really interesting thing to complain about. So he, in his statement, acknowledged the surprising attachment to LLMs, across the way, and how that could have very destructive consequences for people that are mentally fragile. However, he also acknowledges, which I agree with, that it is a very bright future, and one where actually, with AI assistance, it can solve many, many problems. In the UK here, we're trying to solve what is a very broken mental health system, where people can't get the help that they need. They can't get into therapy. Therapy ends too quickly. It's too expensive. There's a stigma around it. The problems are endless. And this is where all of these things, I think, can be tackled and helped, at least assisted with AI to make them better. However, it's really important that we have the shared responsibility to create the correct systems for people, and because we are responsible for it. It's, at the moment, this is such a fringe technology. We're right at the forefront of it, and it's important that we do this correctly.
Absolutely. It's it is a responsibility, but and to have, like you said, a positive spin on it is, it's phenomenal and fantastic to be able to hopefully help lots of people. And we talked about it's a UK problem, but actually I think it's a worldwide problem. I think this is what I'm so excited about is it's accessible to everybody, literally everybody on the planet who's got access to a smartphone, which obviously not everyone does, so I understand that. But if somebody does, then they can use Ava Mind literally without creating an account. So it is literally, and that was one of our key pillars, was accessibility. 100%. So that's phenomenal. So we've just got to keep pushing in the right direction, do the right things, and having these conversations. And I think having these open conversations are really helpful. Be again phenomenal to have mental health professionals engage with these conversations and provide feedback and thoughts. So if there's anyone who is in that field, feel free to reach out. Write them in the comments, all the rest of it. We're very, very open to that dialogue, and we always have been since day one. So is there anything else to add to that, Will?
No, I think you summarized it perfectly, so I think we're good.
Awesome. All right, well, listen, we're gonna hopefully have no technical faults before we drop off, but listen, I hope you all have an amazing day, and we'll look forward to catching up with you on the next one. And next week we'll get back onto our usual stories. We're firing through all the latest news, all the latest gossip in the AI space. I'd quite be interested in sort of talking a little bit about some stuff happening in the decentralized space in terms of blockchain, because I think there's that overlap with blockchain and AI as well. So we'll leave it there, guys, and we'll look forward to catching up with you soon. Take care.
Thanks for watching.